Let's read Psalm 127 and the 5 verses of it. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for so he giveth his beloved sleep. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. The prophetic theme, as we've been seeing previously, lessons here in this psalm. This psalm gives some general truths and some good advice. Verse 1 is a great preaching text. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. Everything depends upon God's blessings in life. Two things are involved. First of all, there's a house, which can be like a household, your family. The Bible says, Hebrews 11:7, that Noah, being warned of God, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, meaning his family. And also a city. Run forward to Daniel chapter 4. Daniel chapter 4. Daniel chapter 4. Notice there are verses 30 and 31. The king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven, saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee. There the city, or the house, was also a city. Keep your finger there. We'll come back to that in a minute. Bible-believing Christians' position is that God himself must take care of the household or the city. When a minister says at a wedding, what God hath joined together, let not man put asunder, those words don't mean very much unless God has actually joined those two together. If God's not involved, don't start invoking God's blessing and his involvement. He had nothing to do with it. God has nothing to do with two unbelieving people who want to get married. He's got no interest in that. He's got nothing is served by the love and the desires and interests of God are not served because two unsaved people are, drawn to each other. He's not interested, he's not involved in same-sex marriages either. And he's not involved in one saved person deciding to marry an unsaved person. They're unequally yoked. He's not involved in any of that. But that, along with other factors, like television, the internet, the godless public school system, the National Education Association, and always meddling government, either at the state and local levels or the federal level, no wonder divorce in America, if it's not 50%, it's at least 40 to 45%. It's approaching 1 out of every 2. If it's not there, it's very high. Since the 1950s, for example, wages gone up 100%. But the cost of food has gone up 400%. And the cost of everything else has gone up. Society's do-gooders want to meddle in your business, and you want to tell them, mind your own business, leave me alone. But they want to push to get the death penalty abolished everywhere they can, or make it so difficult for a state to actually execute a murderer when they get around to it. That's cruel and unusual punishment. You mean to tell me we give a guy an injection of some lethal mixture, and because he might say, ouch, we're not supposed to put him to death? They get involved in that, and then they want to lessen the sentences, so convicted murderers and convicted rapists are loose again on the streets after maybe serving a third of their sentence. And then they want to add insult to injury by disarming everybody else.
Yeah.
You know, we'll protect you by disarming you. That doesn't make much sense. And so all those things working together destroy the success of a home, destroy the sanity of a society or a city or a nation or a state. If God's not watching out for a household or a city, it's going to be vulnerable. Look back at Daniel chapter 5, if you're still there, and verses 30 and 31. In that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain, and Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Some guy's 62 years old, and his armies come in and they overrun the walls of Babylon in a few hours during the night. The ancient city of Babylon was one of the structures they call one of the wonders of the ancient world. They say they talk about the hanging gardens of Babylon and his elaborate vegetation and plants and tree life decorating the entire city. And the walls of Babylon were something like 60 feet thick. There are probably corridors underneath that wall, but on the top, it was wide enough to drive about 4 or 5 chariots side by side around. I mean, think of the mammoth structure and the great undertaking to build that. And they had guards, watchmen, soldiers all over the tops of that wall all the time. And yet those walls were overrun in less than a few hours one night. Go, if you will, to Jeremiah chapter 18. Jeremiah 18. And begin there at verse 7. At what instant I shall speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom, to pluck up and to pull down and to destroy it, if that nation against whom I have pronounced turn from their evil way, I will repent of the evil that I thought to do unto them. And at what instant I shall speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom to build and to plant it, if it do evil in my sight, that it obey not my voice, then I will repent of the good wherewith I said I would benefit them. I don't know how much plainer God could make it. That's pretty plain. Back in the time of America's Civil War, and some of you have read this proclamation, Abraham Lincoln called for a day of fasting and prayer on the part of the American people. He said, "We have been the recipients of the choicest bounties of heaven. We have prospered as no other nation has prospered. And we have vainly," he says, "we've been kept at peace so many times and protected during times of peace and times of war." And then he says, "But we have forgotten God." Right out of Psalm 9:17, "The wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God." And people think they succeed, they prosper in something, and somehow they did it on their own. But if things go bad, a business failure, some bad decision, well, it's that guy's fault, it's that person's fault, somebody else is to blame. That part of human nature doesn't seem to ever go away. And it's not limited to any certain era. The natural tendency of every man is to credit himself when good things come his way, and to blame others if bad things come his way. God says it all depends on whether you are following after me, seeking to please me, seeking to glorify me, seeking to worship me, or not. And verse 2 in our text, "It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for so he giveth his beloved sleep." It's a waste of time to get up earlier than you need to and work yourself to death over things that you might not be able to control anyway. The preacher says in Ecclesiastes 2, verse 17, "Therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me. For all is vanity and vexation of spirit. The things that make you lose sleep are not worth it. I saw someone has offered a very brief bit of advice, which says there are two things you should never worry about. The things you can change and the things you can't change. If you can change your problem and fix it, then there's no need to worry. If you can't fix it, there's no point in worrying. That won't change anything. And really, those two approaches take in almost everything in life. And verse 2 says, For so he giveth his beloved sleep. That's like in the sense of Psalm 4 verse 8, where over there it says, I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, O Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. Proverbs 3 verse 24, When thou liest down, thou shalt not be afraid, yea, thou shalt lie down, and thy sleep shall be sweet. Look forward real quickly, Ecclesiastes 5. Ecclesiastes 5. Ecclesiastes 5, notice one verse there. Solomon writes in verse 12, The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. He still loses sleep. Not because he's hungry, he's had plenty to eat, but he's got other troubles that he can't let go. He's the one who's rising up early than he needs to and staying up late, worrying about something before bedtime. And it's sort of interesting that we should be talking about this subject right after our church hour, our sermon in our church hour. I was reviewing that sermon from about 4 years ago. Thought we'd preach it again before I even prepared this lesson early this morning. But this text confirms to me that that was the right sermon to preach today.
Amen.
We'll see what God does with it. I had a friend visit who I've known since high school. And she's never heard me preach before. And she's still an unsaved lady. Very happy that we stayed friends all these years. And she heard about my current illness, and she wanted to come visit me, and I appreciate that. We'll see what God does with it. Maybe some seed, something that was said will be planted in her heart and thought and mind, and I pray God will bring some fruit forth of it. Amen. But down in our text, verses 3 through 5, let's read those three again. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. Look quickly, run back real quickly, Genesis chapter 9. Genesis 9 verse 1. Genesis 9 verse 1, it says there, And God blessed Noah and his sons, and said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth. Boy, they sure did. You know, after the flood, there were 8 people in the world. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. Just 8 people. And those 3 sons represent the 3 primary racial origins of the human race. Japheth, the oldest son, became the father of all the Caucasian Anglo races. Shem, the boy in the middle, he became the father of all the Asiatic and Eastern races. And Ham, the youngest, he became the father of the African and the black races. Every other race is some combination of those 3 in some way or another. They certainly did multiply. Exodus chapter 1. Exodus 1 and verse 7 says, "And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them." The Bible seems to be for large families. And it's not my place to tell somebody how large is large, or how large your family ought to be. Nor is it anybody else's business how large between you and God and your bank account, you have to decide how large is going to be. And I guess there's some truth to the fact that many generations ago, when most families were living rural on farms, and their income came from working farms and livestock and cattle and pork, cows and pig farming, maybe chicken farms, as well as crops, they needed as many workers to keep it running as they could. So that was one of the benefits of having a lot of children. They were harvesting a lot of food, so feeding them wasn't a problem. But so they needed big families. Today, we don't need big families who are not farmers. All they're doing is looking for welfare. We have too many big families doing that. Yep. And but between you and your spouse and the Lord, and what your budget allows, you decide how large is large. And in this passage, those children are likened to arrows in a quiver of a hunter, which a man uses to defend himself against his enemies. And they say blood runs thicker than water. Normally, a good man's children are not ashamed of him, and they will stand up for their father in a lawsuit or some other kind of dispute, controversy. And whether it's a city or it's your family, a man labors in vain, according to verse 1, because three things. The Bible says, "He that built all things is God." Hebrews 3 verse 4. As if you want it built right, you got to go to the Lord before building it. And the foundation to be laid has to be Jesus Christ, according to the Apostle Paul, 1 Corinthians 3, verse 10 and 11. And Jesus Christ said, "For without me, ye can do nothing." John 15:5. All those things ought to be in the mind of a saint before he begins anything, before he invests anything, before he marries his spouse, before they have children and begin to build their household. If it's not built on God, don't expect it to have God's blessing, God to prosper it. And it's always a tremendous blessing when you know that there are two real believers. They've patiently waited and prayed and sought God to bring that right person into their life to spend their future with. Might not have been the timetable they ever thought when they were younger or had imagined, but it turns out to be exactly the right fit. And I'm thinking of people that are sitting right here, right now. You know who they are. I'm looking right at you both. God bless you. And you'll never be sorry. Dr. Ruckman, in his commentary, talks about big families. And he had a total of 10 children. He fathered or raised. Talked about how all of them were in church. Most of them went to public schools. And they still came out being Bible believers. And none of them ever missed a meal. And he is boasting of how God had provided when things were tight very often. And in his commentary, and I don't know that I could fully agree with him, so I'm not a heretic, but he says, talks about, it says in the text here, so are children of the youth, verse 4, and he says, he thinks about the best time to start having children is when you're about 21. And these days, I would say no. A 21-year-old today is still a child himself. You know, we think about kids, as soon as... There used to be young men, 17 years old, lie about their age because they wanted to enlist in the Army or the Navy or the Marine Corps, to go and defend the country, to fight the communists, or the Japanese, World War II, Korea, even maybe a few in the Vietnam era. And they're seeing their friends and their buddies blown up and shot right next to them. And so many of them, especially World War II veterans, they come back having seen the most gruesome bloodshed. The black and white photos and old news reels don't do it justice. They saw it all in color. And they came back and they just bucked up and, you know, tightened their belts and get on with their lives and never whine and complain and say how rough they had it, just move on with their lives. And there are a lot of World War II vets, very, very few of them around anymore. They're dying very quickly. But they never brought up the horrors and the gruesomeness they saw at sea or in the battle on the battlefield. They just got on with their lives and went about their business and had their families and moved forward. Same thing with the Korean era veterans. And now you got guys 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29 who have to have a safe space. Don't say something I might be offended at. Shut up. Go back home, get your rattle that your mom still has in your keepsake drawer, and suck that for a while because you're not ready to face the world.